started it.
Okay.
All right. May you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Blanche Hughes.
Yes.
And I serve as the Vice President for Student Affairs at Colorado State University.
That is awesome. And where did you grow up?
Now, do you want me to look at the camera or look at you?
Look at me.
Okay. Okay. I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky.
Yes. Nice. And how was it? How was it when you were growing up?
Okay. I feel like I grew up at a very interesting time.
Yes.
I was born in 1956.
Yes.
And so I grew up in a time where we were going through a transition in Kentucky and Lexington in particular,
Yes.
between legal segregation, racial segregation, and integration.
Wow. Okay.
And so I actually grew up very low income
Yes.
in a government housing project.
Wow.
And my parents
Yes.
were, my mother did graduate from high school. She had a high school education, but my father
Yes.
only went to school until the 5th grade.
Only the 5th grade?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then his mother died in childbirth, having with her 11th child, so his youngest brother. And so at that time, his father was like, "Hey, there's a lot of mouths to feed, and you need to go out and try to find a job."
Wow.
And so back then, because it was really segregation back then,
Yeah.
because he was born in 1911,
Yes.
there were a lot of very, very wealthy, rich white people, and so kids could find jobs like helping out around the house or running errands, and they could make, or even if they couldn't get money, they could get like food that they could bring home. And so that's what he ended up doing, was running around a lot, just looking for any kind of work he could get.
Yeah.
He eventually connected with a man who was raising horses for horse racing, and started working for him.
Yes.
And he ultimately became a jockey.
Wow.
And raced horses for.
Your dad did?
My dad did. Yep. For many years. And what a lot of people don't know is that horse racing, when it first started, all the jockeys were black, because it wasn't seen as a profession. It was a very dangerous profession, and it didn't make much money. But after they started making money, then they moved pretty much all the black jockeys out of the profession, and they all became horse trainers, and then they brought in more white jockeys.
And why do you think that was?
It was racism. That's what it was. That was during the time of Jim Crow laws, where there's segregation, and if there was going to be money in something, then black people couldn't be part of that. And so anyway, by the time I was born, I have an older brother and sister. By the time I was born, my father had stopped working the racetrack, but he didn't. He had to find another way of making a living, and without a high school diploma, he worked in domestic work, is what we call it now. So he was a handyman, and he was a chauffeur, and he was a bartender, and learned how to wait tables and things like that. So what we called it, he served parties, and then he worked really for wealthy folks in Lexington.
And with that, how did that have an effect on you?
Well, that's all I knew. So it didn't really have a big effect in terms of the segregation part, because all of my family and friends, we all lived in the same neighborhoods and went to the same schools. Going through the integration part is the part that probably impacted me the most.
Okay.
So talk about that.
Yes,
so
please.
what happened was, Brown versus the Board of Education, I think that happened in 1950. I used to know it. 1950 something. It was 58, 56, somewhere in there. And but in Lexington and in Kentucky, they chose not to obey the federal law to desegregate schools. And we didn't really desegregate our schools until I was in junior high.
Junior high. And so you could not go to another school?
I could not go to a predominantly white school. I could only go to the school in a black neighborhood.
And do you think that during that time, when there was that happening, did that affect the path that you could have taken?
You know, I don't think so, because one of the advantages I had with my parents, my father working for very wealthy
Yeah.
white people,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother was primarily a stay-at-home mom, but she did what's now called nanny. She was a nanny. Back
Yeah.
then it was called a babysitter.
Okay.
So she babysat,
Yeah.
she did ironing and laundry, and basically back then, rich white people didn't really do anything for themselves. They had servants to do, or paid people to do things for them.
Right.
And so that was a major way that my mother and many of her friends, that's how they made a living, was nannying, taking care of people's children,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So both of my parents kind of did that. But there were some of those folks that my parents took care of that they really had a relationship with, particularly the children.
Mm-hmm.
They raised them. And so they really connected with them and had a bond with them that went, for them, was beyond race. To them, they were kids, right? They were kids. And when they were little,
Yeah.
they were kids, because the kids that's who took care of them, that's who they loved.
Yeah.
And so my parents had a different kind of look on race in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always knew, because they always told me that there was no difference. I wasn't inferior to white people.
Yeah.
We weren't less than, even though those were the messages we were constantly given every day.
Yeah.
In our neighborhood, in my family, we were not given those messages. And so I grew up really thinking anything they could do, I could do.
And with that, that's actually quite an important point. And with that, do you think that's why you went to college?
Oh, I know. Yeah, I knew I was going to go to college.
Uh-huh.
My brother went to college. My sister went to college.
Wow.
My brother went to college, ended up with a master's degree. Was a film editor. My sister went to college, then medical school,
Yeah.
specialized in the medical specialty, and then also got a master's of public health at Harvard.
Wow.
So she went on, and then I went on to get a PhD. My mother used to joke that perhaps they pushed education a little bit too much for us, because it seemed like we were always in school.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And like always in school, like with clubs and.
No, advanced degrees, that we just kept going on for advanced degrees. And
Okay, that's actually seems to be true.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was my parents.
Yeah.
Always said,
Yeah.
my father, I think he was like a philosopher. And he used to say, the world's going to get better one day, where race is not going to limit our opportunities like it did for me.
Mm-hmm.
And education is going to be the way that happens. And you can never take education away from someone. As you need to learn how to read, you need to write, you need to be a scholar.
And
And they pushed that for me.
And what did you learn during your childhood?
I learned hard work.
Mm-hmm.
My parents worked hard. My father worked 3 or 4 jobs. So I learned hard work. I learned that life is not fair. Because I used to say, well, how come, those people get to do this? Or how come black people can't go to the movie theater and sit, in the regular theater? Why do we have to go up in the balcony? Why can't we do such and certain thing? And, they would just say, life just isn't fair. And so what you have to do is figure out, how do you sort of make the best of what you have, or how can you make that better? And how can you help make a difference in the world? If you don't like the way the world is,
yeah.
Can you have a role in helping to change that? And so I grew up with with my parents and my parents' friends, because it was a community again. Really emphasizing school, like, when I get my grades, my mom's friends, my dad's friends, neighbors give you a dime for, having a good report card. And it was really this kind of amazing community piece. I grew up with both of my parents, and so we may not have had a lot of money, but I didn't really know that. growing up, I was happy. Everything I wanted and needed,
Uh-huh.
I got. Now, my clothes may have been hand-me-down clothes from other people, but they were nice clothes, and I didn't think anything of it, you know. So I learned humility
Uh-huh.
growing up. I learned to be positive, try to be positive. That you could go through the world being mad and angry and seeing the world, you know, sort of as the glass half empty kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Or
Uh-huh.
it's your choice that you could try to go through the world trying to find the positive, trying to work towards change, and that's what I chose to do.
And we'll get that. We'll get to that in a further because it definitely ties into what you're doing currently.
Right.
But that definitely is one that we definitely should watch.
Okay.
And I definitely will want to talk about that. But I don't want to get too ahead of us.
Sure.
But what did you want to be when you were growing up?
I wanted to be a teacher.
Oh wow.
From earliest I can remember, I wanted to be an elementary school teacher because I loved, and I still love, children. And I love school. So I figure let's put those two together, and that's what I wanted to do. You know, I didn't know a whole lot about other professions out there. You know, for me, you were a teacher, or you were an engineer, or a doctor, or a lawyer, you know, but I had no idea of all the different professions that were available to me. And when I thought about education, it was either being a high school teacher or an elementary school teacher. I didn't even think about college teaching.
Oh, you did not?
I did not. So I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. And then I wanted to be an elementary school teacher, and I also played basketball and a basketball coach.
Oh, you were a basketball coach as well?
I played basketball, and I just coached for a year, but that's what I wanted to do.
That's what you wanted to do. And did you? And why didn't you want to be a VP of Student Affairs?
Because I never heard of that. I didn't know there was such jobs existed. You know, I knew that there was a principal. Remember, at that point, I hadn't gone. I wanted to go to college. I didn't know what college was. I hadn't been there before. I didn't know what kind of positions were in college. All I knew in education was teaching and maybe being a principal. And so I didn't dream of being a vice president of anything, but particularly of student affairs, because I didn't even know what that was. I didn't even know that was even a possibility.
And how did you get to college?
So since I knew that I wanted to go to college,
yes.
And I had an older brother and sister, and both of them went to college. So my parents, although they didn't go to college, they had the experience of sending my brother and sister to college. So they, you know, knew kind of what they needed to do.
Yes.
And then, so I knew I was going, and since my brother's 10 years older than me, and my sister's 6 years older. Oh. So quite a bit of distance. And so when it got close for me to start to look at schools, I had some criteria that I looked at. That
and what were those?
They were, I had to go to a college that I could drive to. Because at that point in my life, I had never been on an airplane. And to me, at that point, airplanes made no sense to me. I couldn't figure out how this big old machine was going to fly in the air. And I'm like, no way am I going to get on that thing. So I was like, I am not ever flying. So it had to be within driving distance. It had to be farther enough away from my parents that they just couldn't drop by whenever they wanted to, but close enough that I could get home if I wanted to. So that was the criteria. Another one was, it had to be, I wanted to go to a co-ed school. So I didn't want to go to all male or all female school.
What's a co-ed?
Where, like CSU,
CSU.
men and women go to school together.
Okay.
There are some back then in particular, there were a lot of all male schools and all female schools. And I didn't want that. I wanted to go to one where there were men and women. I wanted to go to a school that did not have separate rules for men and women. Because back then there were a lot of schools, most universities actually, where the women had to be in the residence halls by a certain time, They couldn't go out. They couldn't do a lot of things that the men could do. And we, this was in the '70s, so the civil rights movement was coming sort of to an end, but the feminist movement was still part of that. So I was young, but I was old enough to go, I don't want that. So it had to have a women's basketball team because I played basketball. And again, not a lot of schools had women's sport teams. And it needed to have co-ed halls, residence halls, where men and women lived together in the same hall, and I don't know why, but I just remember that was a priority of mine.
Okay.
And obviously, strong academic school that had education, because I knew that's what I wanted to do. I thought that's what I wanted to do. So that was my criteria, and a small school.
And a small school.
Because I didn't want to go to a large school where I would feel. I wanted to go someplace that's pretty intimate.
Oh, okay. Okay. And was it one of your criteria also to go to a school? And back then, was there a school that accepted black people?
At that point, there were a lot of schools that were accepting black people because of the civil rights movement and desegregation, and so a lot of predominantly white schools would actually get federal funding to diversify their school.
Oh wow!
And so, and I had an option of looking at going to a predominantly black school or historical black school or going to a white school. And I chose to go to the white school, particularly because I felt like I have grown up and been in a almost all black environment, and that if I'm going to go out in the world, I needed to be around white people. And of course, for me back then, if you talked about diversity, it was either black people or white people. It wasn't, I didn't know of or think about any other, ethnicity or racial differences in people. So those were all of my criteria.
Yes.
And so I went to a small Quaker school called Earlham College.
And how was your experience over there?
It was great. Earlham was a school because of its Quaker tradition, which is something I also liked. During the civil rights era and during slavery in particular, the Quakers were some of the folks that really helped with Underground Railroad. They always had a philosophy of trying to be open to people. And so I liked that philosophy. And so when I went there, it was because it's very small. It was only about 1,200 students.
Wow, it's
very small.
Smaller than high school.
Yeah, smaller than a lot of people's high school. And I like being in that small environment because I like knowing people. I'm very extroverted, and so I'm very social. And I like knowing everybody. I like that. I like knowing my professors and being able to go to their home for dinner and getting to know them. So I did very much have a wonderful experience. The only bad thing was, remember I said I wanted to be an elementary school teacher, right?
Yes, that's right.
I went to Earlham. One of the reasons was because they had an elementary school program.
Yes.
After my freshman year, they dropped that program. They decided not to do it and have it anymore.
And what were you thinking then?
So then I'm like, because I loved Earlham, I didn't want to leave it.
Yeah.
So I said, well, what else can I major in where I could teach elementary school? And it was physical education. So I became a PE major. But when you go to a small liberal arts school, it really doesn't matter what you major in, because the first 2.5 years, you're taking all students are taking the same classes. It's not like CSU, where a lot of students will come in with a major and focus on and stay with that or change to more professional kinds of majors. Ours was strictly a liberal arts. So it's so picking PE was fine because I was still getting all the other classes within humanities and math and science and all that anyway, so it worked out. So that's what I did so that I could be certified to teach elementary school.
And why did you choose CSU?
Well, after I graduated from Earlham, I could not find a job teaching because there was a glutton of teachers across the nation at that time, and I couldn't find a job coaching because Earlham was a very liberal, open-minded type of university, particularly for its time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a very different way of looking at the world, much more inclusive, much more non-traditional, I'd say. So, and that was my view of coaching too, especially coaching junior high school girls, is getting them loving movement and loving being on a team and developing their skills, but all basketball skills, but also developing them as young girls and young women. And in Indiana, that's not really what they were looking for. They want a coach that said, get out there and do whatever you need to do to win. So I ended up staying at Earlham and working there in student affairs. I became a resident director. And then I worked as a counselor there. And then eventually I became an assistant dean of students. And it was at that point, because I didn't even know student affairs was a career.
Oh, you did?
No.
And how did you get to that point?
To figure that out?
Yeah.
So I was really active when I was a student also. So I not only played basketball, but I was involved in a lot of leadership things. I ran the intramural program. I ran the tutoring program. I was involved in lots of clubs and organizations. And so I was doing student affairs work. I just didn't know that. I thought this, I'm going to be a teacher. I'm just doing this stuff. I get paid for it. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
And so when I graduated, because I had all that experience, it made it. I was able to get this art resident director position, which is very much student affairs. And I still wasn't going to do that. I was trying to figure out. I thought about being a physical therapist and didn't know what I wanted to do. And what happened was we hired at Earlham. We hired a man to be the director of our student center. And he had gotten a master's degree in student affairs from Colorado State University.
Oh, wow.
And I just remember being in meetings with him.
Yes.
And I was just so impressed. Like, we try to figure out, what are we going to do with this program, or here's the issue, and he'd be like, well, blah, 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 and the theory on this says this, and you could do this. And I was just like, I remember his name was Keith. I was like, Keith, how do you know so much? Because we just sort of look at, what did we do last year, and did it work, and let's do it again, And then he told me all about that this was a profession that could get a master's degree. And so, about 3 years working there, and at that point I was also married and had 2 kids, 2 young kids. Wow. And I just said, you know what, I like this work, and this is what I want to do. So I applied to different programs. There weren't as many programs out there in student affairs or higher education as there are now. Yes. But I applied to the top programs that I knew about in the country, and got accepted to all of them. But I narrowed it down to Harvard and Colorado State.
Wow. Okay. And why Harvard?
Well, because it was Harvard.
Oh.
Come on now. And I got accepted to Stanford too, but they didn't offer me enough money for us to move to California. So that's why I was like, can't do that. But Harvard offered a good financial aid package. I liked their program. And so it really was kind of my first choice. The Colorado State has one of the top programs in the country too. But I had never heard of Colorado State except when Keith came. I had never been to Colorado. Had never been to Boston either. So, but I was leaning towards Harvard. I have to be honest. So we needed to go visit one of the schools. We couldn't go and visit both. Yeah. So my husband's mother, he grew up in Newark, New Jersey. And so we took the kids to New Jersey and we drove up to Boston because in order to get housing, we actually had to physically go there to get the listing of housing that they had for students. And so we went up there, and I hate big cities. I hated big cities, so I thought, I got to go visit and see if I can do this. We went there in April. They had a blizzard, and people were mean. Oh. And I already did not like the East Coast or big cities. So I'm like, I am not coming here. It's just too much. It's just too big. It's too busy. People are not very nice. In Kentucky, we're really nice to your face. Now, we may stab you behind your back, when you're not looking. But at least we're nice to you, you know, which isn't good either. But
Yeah.
I just, you know, I'm used to the hominess of being from the South and all that. So I said, we're going to Colorado State. So
Have you even been to Colorado before you said that?
we couldn't afford it, and all we had were the pictures. Which, by the way, back then they had to send, you know, had to get them in the mail because the computer, we didn't have internet yet. So my husband and I packed up our 2 kids, and he quit his job at the time, and we moved out here. And I got into the program here, and got an assistantship working in family housing. And so my tuition was paid for, my housing was paid for.
Wow.
So we knew we could come here. My husband could maybe find some kind of job just to help us with food. I also got a couple of scholarships and fellowships. So it was great, you know. So that's what brought me to Colorado State.
Okay.
We were going to be here for 2 years, and then we were going to leave, and 35 years later, we're still here.
And, yeah, we unpack that.
So, yes.
Yeah, and it's wonderful so far. And but I also want to figure out though, when you came here, it seems like all the things you've done, it seems like it all like goes back to your childhood. So so when you came to Colorado, did it remind you of your childhood? That's why you stayed, or did it remind you of what you could do, or what you could possibly achieve here?
More about what I could achieve here, because I met some awesome, amazing people in my master's degree program, students, but also faculty and staff, and I thought there's something special about this place, even though there were not very many people of color, particularly black people. We moved here in June, and I didn't see a black face for 2 weeks. So I did wonder, like, whoa, where did we move? Because I've never been in a place where there were like no black people. Usually you could go to a part of town and find black people, right? Not in Fort Collins.
Yeah, Fort Collins, yeah.
So, but CSU, and that's where I spent most of my time, right? It's in my work. The people were amazing. They encouraged me, for example, to look at getting a doctorate degree. I wasn't going to get a doctorate degree. I got a master's degree. I didn't know what that was before I got one. And I thought, I'm fine. I particularly got a job after being here for 2 years. I worked for housing for a year.
Yes.
And then I got a job as the director of what's now called the Black African American Cultural Center.
Yes.
And I loved it. And because my goal when I came here was that I was going to leave and go back and work in a small college.
A small college.
Because I loved my experience at Earlham, and so I wanted to go back and work at a school like Earlham, very small. But my husband really liked his job because he got a really nice job here, and so after 2 years, it's like, do we really want to leave? I really liked here. I liked living here. So when I was able to get this job as a director, what I loved about it was, yes, this was at a large school, but it was a program that was very intimate, very small, and so it reminded me of being at a small college. In that position, in that role, you know, my job was to help particularly black students to be successful here at CSU, to graduate, to have good experiences. But part of that role also was to help Colorado State University to become more inclusive and more open to people of color. And you needed both.
And is that why there's the community and the inclusiveness and the integrity and all those principles that guides Colorado State? Were you a part of that?
That happened a couple of years ago. I was supportive of it, but I had staff that really worked directly with it. But in terms of the final approval of it and being involved with it along the way and being consulting with the Vice President for Diversity, I was involved in that sense.
Oh, awesome. Yes, and I also want to pack up. So you learned humility at what's the name of the place?
Earlham.
Oh, Earlham. No, at your Lexington.
Oh, in Lexington.
Lexington.
Sure.
Yes, because about your parents and just Tripletastik, and then you said you learned about community and stuff like that. And is that when you took your job? Did you try to bring all of that you've learned to your job?
Absolutely. I try to do that every day. Every day. Trying to be open-minded and caring and have empathy.
Yeah.
And drawing on the strength that, you need to move on when life isn't fair.
Yes.
So absolutely I bring that. That's part of who I am. That's me. So when I walk into a room, everything that I have been and have experienced in my life is part of me. I've experienced discrimination. I've experienced all of that. And I've worked to try to overcome and change.
And you try to change that, but before we went too far. But
Right.
when you were before you got your how did you know that you wanted to do a sociology degree at Colorado State for master's and PhD?
Okay, so my master's is actually in education.
Oh, okay.
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 It's a master's of education in student affairs.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that's awesome.
Well, I wasn't really going to get a PhD.
Mhm.
Because in the job I was in, I was director of Black Student Services. I had 3 young kids, and I'm thinking, I'm done with school. I could stay in this job and never need another PhD. I never need a PhD. So what happened was a couple of things. One is I taught and advised in the graduate program that I graduated from, because it's a scholar practitioner-based program. So many of the faculty are people who work in the division. And when I would be talking with my advisees, and they would be looking for jobs after 2 years, and I'd help them do that, I look at these jobs and think, well, if I wanted to, I could do that, I could do that, I could do that. But I started to see more and more of those positions were asking for a PhD. So I thought, even though I have no intentions of leaving, I want to make sure I keep my options open. So I should look at getting a PhD. That was one reason. The other one is I love learning. And also, if you're going to stay at a university, getting a doctorate degree gives you more credibility, no matter what you get it in.
And okay, go ahead.
And so I did that. So that was another reason.
Yeah.
And I thought,